Good morning, everyone. My esteemed teachers, Professor Ashok Kumar Mahapatra, Professor Sobita Tripathi, Dr. Aloka Patel, the head of the department, Professor Kalidas Mishra, our students and research scholars from the department, Speaker of the day, Dr. Parthasarathi Gupta from Tripura University, students, teachers, professors, literary enthusiasts who are connected with us from all over the country, I welcome you to the third lecture of the online lecture series 2021. Dear audience, we have developed a lot of discourses on environmental and ecological literature, especially towards the second half of the 20th century. However, our ideas, perceptions, and arguments continue to be based on our anthropogenic and anthropocentric positions. Our understanding of environmental literature and theories thereof have not been able to stop ecocide. And perhaps it's proper on our part, therefore, to continue our deliberations on issues related to environment in literature. The title of today's lecture is Resisting the Ecology of Bad Ideas, an Ecosophical Approach to Literature. I'm sure we are going to have an illuminating session on this topic. Thank you, Dr. Gupta, for having consented to deliver the talk on this topic. Now, I would like to request our head of the department, Dr. Aloka Patel, to introduce Dr. Gupta to the audience. Ma'am, over to you. I think yes.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome, Dr. Parthasarathi Gupta. You are certainly no more new to our department. You're not new anymore, but for the benefit of those who have not yet been introduced to you, I can assure them you are going to meet a wonderful scholar and speaker on the topic for today, Resisting the Ecology of Bad Ideas, an Ecosophical Approach to Literature. Dr. Parthasarathi Gupta teaches in the Department of English, Tripura University at Agartala. His areas of interest and specialization are theatre studies, Indian aesthetics, modern critical theory, popular culture and literature, and Shakespeare scholarship and criticism. His alma mater is the University of Calcutta, from where he pursued both BA and MA. And for his PhD on Indian English drama and urbanity, that was in Burdwan University, Bengal, and he was supervised by Professor Himadri Lahiri. So Professor Lahiri has also joined us, and it's a privilege to have his company. So Dr. Gupta's interests are also in translations of the orators of Boncher, how do I pronounce it? Maraima, Chakma and Tripuri communities, which have been published by Sahitya Academy, Northeast Center for Oral Literature and Culture, in its anthologies dedicated to each community respectively. So he has a wide interest from cultural studies, popular culture, to Shakespeare, to theatre, to translation of folk tales, and for today. And he has also been a visiting professor with our department in Sambalpur University. So I welcome you with these words, Dr. Parthasarathi Gupta, and to make your presentation. Over to you, Dr. Parthasarathi.
Good morning, everybody. It's really a privilege to be here with you today. And I especially thank the Department of English, Sambalpur University, the Postgraduate Department of English, Sambalpur University, and the head of the department, Dr. Aloka Patel, to have given me this opportunity to be with you here and also be a part of your department. And I also extend my heartfelt thanks to all the members of the department, Professor Sabita Tripathi, um, Professor Ashok Mahapatra. I can see him sitting there. Thank you, sir, for being there to listen to me today. Uh, Professor Kalidas Mishra, who was a teacher at our department. He was one of the first professors of the Department of English, Tripura University, way back. And, Ajit, Dr. Ajit Kumar Kullu, for constantly being in touch. And I also thank Professor Himadri Lahiri, my supervisor, who's there with me, my teacher, my mentor. It makes me actually to find a galaxy of people here from the world of academics, and I will try to do. I will try to see to it that I live up to your expectations. Now, the title of my lecture, as has already been introduced to you today, I shall straight away, present my slide to you for. So please give me an opportunity to share my screen with you, and please let me know if my screen is visible. Can you see my screen, and am I audible? Please let me know.
Presentation now.
So,
Can you see my screen?
yes, yes.
Yes, sir. Yes. Yes, you can see.
Fine. So this is the title of my talk today: Resisting the Ecology of Bad Ideas Towards an Ecosophical Approach to Literature. Now, to begin with, my definition of the ecology of bad ideas. Let me begin with this. This is actually drawn from, this is a phrase which I have drawn from Gregory Bateson. I will talk about that a little later. But let's first try to understand what exactly I meant by the ecology of bad ideas, my reading of Bateson. Now, let me begin with the etymology of ecology itself, going back to the Greek word oikos. And the word ecology is actually a very 19th century sort of a word. The roots of which can be traced to the Greek word oikos, which means home. Now, the comfort of our home is not just built upon bricks, stones, mortar, and RCC pillars. Indeed, our home must be, in some extent, built upon an environment which may make us feel protected, cozy, insulated from the vicissitudes of weather, inclement weather. But even beyond that, we may be living sometimes we may be living in a simple tree house, yet we may count ourselves king of infinite space. So, first our parents, then our children, our friends make our home, not brick and mortar. And then, by extension, our neighbors, our extended families who surround us, sometimes who safeguard our right to our territorial boundaries, besides our juridical proprietorship of our property. So our fortification and our sustenance in our own home depends upon so many people around us. in that space which we call home. Now, this is what we mean ecology. Now, toxic people around us, if we have toxic people around our homes, do not make us comfortable. Sometimes toxic people are like weeds, which who eat into our carefully built-in space. Now, our academic territory too. Sometimes we have we detect that we need to fortify ourselves. Sometimes we feel this need. Our academic territory ought to be built around with strong ideas, frameworks, sound ideas, which are sustainable and enriching at the same time. Now, if we are surrounded by bad ideas in the last 2 decades, or beyond the last 2 decades even, the discipline of literature studies, the discipline of aesthetics in particular, humanities in general, these disciplines have been clogged by fashionable turns like post-humanism, alterity, politics based on identity, and we have been hovering around ideas of sexuality, economics. All that is fine. Ethnicity, race. Studies of literature were being gradually sucked into this vicious cycle of sorts. Centripetal critical theory, which seemed to repeat and almost reiterate the same old stuff with more and more what Ajit just now called the anthropocentric modes of analysis. This is exactly what Gregory Bateson calls the ecology of bad ideas. And he says that the ecology of bad ideas is just like the ecology of weeds. There is a narcotic element about this ecology of bad ideas, and these bad ideas somehow have survived, have multiplied in the course of time. And Gregory Bateson asks, is there some sort of a natural selection which ensures the survival of these ideas and the extinction or death of other ideas? So there is a sort of a kind of a economics which is working here. Some sort of an economics which limits the multiplicity of ideas in a given region of mind. Now, this is exactly what Gregory Bateson calls the normative principle of critical theory. And Gregory Bateson's book, Steps to the Ecology of the Mind, which I referred to in my earlier slide. If you look at my earlier slide, Gregory Bateson's book, Steps to an Ecology of Mind. I found this book first in an epigraph to Felix Guattari's The Three Ecologies. And then I was inspired to read this book. And first I started reading the introduction of this book. Sometimes you see, and I began to read the book in a sort of in a non-structured manner. And then I found some extremely illuminating ideas, which is why this book has inspired me to some extent in carrying out further studies in this field. So in one of the introductory chapters, Gregory Bateson refers to a sort of an anecdote from the life of Molière. And I mentioned this in my slide here. Molière, long ago, he depicted an oral doctoral examination in which the learned doctors asked the candidate to state the cause and reason why opium puts people to sleep. And the candidate triumphantly answers in dog Latin, because there is in it a normative principle. That is the answer which this doctoral student gives. And Gregory Bateson explains in a very humorous way that the scientist studies this interaction and notes his observation thus. Either the opium contains a reified dormitive principle, or the man contains a reified need for sleep, which is expressed in his response to opium. So Bateson says that characteristically all such hypotheses are dormitive in the sense that they put people to sleep. They put to sleep the critical faculty within the scientist himself. Now, this is exactly what I have chosen to quote from. And while we are engaging with the oikos of academia, how the oikos of academia, the academical environment over the years has been clogged by diverse, multiple, plethora of theoretical terms, and the literature studies was gradually becoming affected by politics, ethnicity, borders, divisions, hatred, one community, one subject pitted against the other, objectification, or subsumed into the other, almost like and each sort of critical stance, each critical stance almost became a sort of still does today, almost has become a sort of a meta-narrative. And each of these meta-narratives somehow was being directed by distinct ideological intents on the part of the critic, on the part of the theorist. And, Gregory Bateson is opening them to scrutiny. And, I would recall in this context how, what exactly Francois Lyotard calls in one of his essays, The Postmodern Condition, that, we have reached a certain stage in the history of consciousness that, a stage in which can be described as, a temperament which we are developing, which he described as the incredulity of meta-narratives. So, it is in this context that I thought of, proposing a sort of drawing from the observations of Gregory Bateson and also your Guattari, that one must set our house in order, and in order to our academia, our academic environment needs to be set in order. And the oikos of academia needs to have an alternative arrangement of sorts, only to make our objective more sustainable and oriented towards a constructive epistemic direction. Now, it is here that we start engaging with the importance of being ecosophical. One realizes the importance of a new commitment to ecology, of the need to construct an ecosophy sans anthropocentrism, sort of a philosophy beyond borders. Since the Renaissance, when we teach our students in class, particularly our core English curriculum, when we engage with the age of Renaissance, humanism, and then later Enlightenment. Since the Renaissance, we have seen how theory has reposed faith on what the ancient Greek sophists called the centrality of man in the cosmic order. And we have continued to define all our engagements, including our artistic and literary engagements, via anthropocentrism. Here lies the importance of ecosophy, a commitment to a philosophy beyond borders, beyond hierarchies, encouraging what Guattari calls the chaos, the wild, the elegant, and the harmonious randomness of nature. So, in fact, Guattari, in his book, The Three Ecologies, another very, very important book, and a very interesting book too. Deleuze and Guattari, they are, their engagements sometimes are too complex and cannot be exactly negotiated with at a surface level, and one must, it requires a long period of time to grasp Deleuze and Guattari. But the Three Ecologies is one book which may be recommended even to the master's degree student, I believe. So Guattari asks the philosopher to think deeper into the structures that have been created over time, and to think beyond the sort of subjectification of the self and the world which we generally engage in whenever we deal with critical theory, and think about a sort of an alternative to the kind of false consciousness which critical theory has generated in the course of time. This is exactly what we mean by the ecology of bad ideas. Now, in order to sum up in one line, what then is the Batesian ecology of bad ideas? Because I have used this in the title. The answer would be critical theory with the centripetality of anthropomorphism. This is the ecology of bad ideas. Ecosophy, in fact, it is from here that the idea of ecosophy begins. Ecosophy as an approach, as Guattari argues in the Three Ecologies, as an activity which may be conceived of as being transversal. What is transversal in mathematics when we talk about transversality? It's a notion that describes how spaces can intersect. So we may also use the word intersectionality to deal with, to describe this approach, which snatches the focus away with vengeance from man at the center and man only, and create new epistemes which essentially would try to speak about man's interconnectedness with the world around him. Now, it is in this context that I happen to think about a particular commercial, a television commercial, which is very popular. I'm sure all of you must have seen it. It's a television commercial on paint, Birla White wall care. And I would like you to go through this slide, go through this video of this advertisement, because within this 10-second or 20-second advertisement, there is a lot which can become the focus of our study of non-anthropocentric approach to critical theory at large. So I proceed to show you this slide. Please have a look at this. I titled this slide "Polar Bear in the Zoo."
बर्फ जैसी ठंड, भरपूर खाना और खिलौने होने के बावजूद ये पोलर बेयर कई दिनों से उदास है। इसकी वजह शायद बर्फ जैसी सफेदी होने की कमी है। क्या कुछ ऐसा है जो इस पोलर बेयर को खुश कर सकता है?
है ना, बिरला व्हाइट वॉल के पुट्टी, क्योंकि ये है बर्फ से भी सफेद।
ये तो कमाल हो गया। बिरला व्हाइट वॉल के पुट्टी की सफेदी से पोलर बेयर इतना खुश।
बिरला व्हाइट वॉल के पुट्टी में है बेहतरीन क्वालिटी वाला बिरला व्हाइट सीमेंट, जो दे सबसे ज्यादा सफेदी। इसलिए चुनिए जर्मन टेक्नोलॉजी से बने पॉलीमर्स वाली बिरला व्हाइट वॉल के पुट्टी। यही है इंडिया की असली और सबसे सफेद पुट्टी।
Now, sometimes, I'm sure you got to see it. I hope you could hear the video. You could see and hear it clearly. Now, sometimes television commercials engage in gross atrocities. Whether atrocities on gender. This is one atrocity which was shocking, in fact. It affected me in a sense. I'm going to come to this notion of affects at a later stage. How this advertisement, how this commercial has affected me. Now, this animal, this polar bear, is unhappy. And you see how, the whoever has scripted this ad has been, in a way, insensitive in sort of portraying a sort of a cosmetic, imposing a sort of a cosmetic dimension to this entire concept of happiness. And it's a classic example, as I would look at this ad. This is a classic example of estrangement, alienation, in Marxian terms, an estrangement within our own oikos, meaning home. The root of eco. Now, we've really upset the delicate symbiosis between ourselves and our oikos. Now, at the macrocosmic level, our oikos is threatened beyond repair or reboot, which we have come to realize with with a lot of frustration today. Beyond repair or reboot, whether it is in the land or in air or in the oceans, every inch of space seems to be, to some extent, poxed poxed in the sense, POXED. So, and in this context, I have used the notion of estrangement in my next slide. The objective of this particular talk today is to bring the spotlight onto this notion of estrangement, the awareness of this primal separation from our oikos. It's as if we have, cosmetically cut off our link somewhere. The question is there a need for restoration? Or is there a possibility of restoration of sorts? If so, how? Now, that is the pressing concern for all disciplines. In fact, maybe for the first time in the history of epistemology, we are helplessly aware of a need to adopt a cross-disciplinary strategy, a methodology to counter, to neutralize, to restrict, to minimize the damage we have already done to ourselves. You see, philosophy, the father of all disciplines, must be, in fact, conceived of as our new Brahma. And we feel the need to seek its umbrella to save ourselves. So we must go back to the root of the logic of philosophy. And philosophy can save ourselves once again from the thunderbolt of the demons of science, which have become almost our Frankenstein. So as students of literature, as students of, say, culture studies, what do we do? Let us do what we can and seek a sort of a renaissance of sorts to revitalize our lost elan vital. Hence, the logical this happens to set the logical foundations of an ecosophical approach to our discipline, literature. We shall in the process excavate from the subject position of our own literary history traces of this ecosophical approach, whether we in our past, I'm talking about as an Indian, whether we can trace from our own subject position as an Indian, whether we can trace a kind of an ecosophical approach to art, to literature, to representation, which had been there at one point of time, whether we can go back to that approach again and seek to channelize the same, to the understanding of our present subject position. For methodological support for this talk, I've chosen Felix Guattari's The Three Ecologies, which I have referred to. The extension of a definition of ecology. In fact, Guattari's objective is to extend the definition of ecology to encompass social relations and human subjectivity as well as, in addition to environmental concerns. We do eco-criticism today in our universities. So beyond even eco-criticism, to encompass, social relations and human subjectivity as well as environmental concerns. And all this is articulated in Felix Guattari's essay, The Three Ecologies, which is, I believe, an indispensable book today. So The Three Ecologies is a sort of a vitriolic critique of late and advanced capitalism and what Lyotard called the postmodern condition, in which Guattari argues for a new ecosophical approach to life, culture, and even literature. In this talk today, the literary texts, the literary works that I have chosen in this discussion carry traces of that concern and that approach, which, if adopted, may open up new possibilities for life on this increasingly vulnerable planet. But before all that, before I move over to that particular literary work which I have chosen, I'm disclosing that to you. I have chosen Kalidas's Abhigyan Shakuntalam. But before that, let me provide a sort of a theoretical background. A theoretical background needs to be established, to highlight this idea of estrangement as introduced by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Where he talks about, where they talk about the abstraction of labor. On a general level, let us first try to understand what we mean by estrangement or alienation as a kind of a disconnect, which all of us experience today from our cosmos, a disconnect facilitated by the inevitable forces of capitalism as the chief mover and shaker of life today. And we cannot undo this. We cannot go back. We cannot take a detour or a U-turn. We may only imagine or fantasize, how the Flintstones lived in the Stone Age. That we cannot do anything beyond that. And we experience new forms of alienation today. Please, I repeat, today we are experiencing new forms of estrangement or alienation. And when Marx and Engels spoke about alienation in their early writings, they introduced the notion of estrangement in terms of the disconnect which workers experience from their labor. This is for the students who are there in this in my session today. Labor was understood as a sort of an activity estranged from the existence of the workers. Later in Das Kapital, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels introduced the notion of abstract labor. So, but today, somehow, the concept of alienation, this idea of alienation, we've gone beyond the Marxian notion of alienation today. And this melee of estrangement, diagnosed by Marx in the 19th century, have somehow assumed different proportions today, new advanced proportions today, in the midst of intense techno-scientific transformations. I use the word, and they have made life extremely toxic. Particularly, I'm talking about the proliferation of mass media. Felix Guattari, in fact, uses the phrase the gangrene of mass media and the contagion of digital media. These words, toxic, virulent, contagion, these have been used to describe the mutated form of the Marxian notion of estrangement today. Today, we are going through a sort of a mutation of sorts. Toxic because, it has initiated a violent sort of ecological disequilibrium, as pointed out by Guattari. Virulent and contagious because it has begun to affect human modes of life, and it also has a narcotic effect, both on the individual level as well as on the collective level. And progressively, this is a progressive degeneration of sorts, a degeneration of human cosmos kinships. Gregory Bateson would call this sort of a new transformed kinship an ecology of weeds, because it is so narcotic. Look at the way in which today youngsters are hooked onto Facebook. hooked on to digital media. This may be very common. This may not be something new that I'm talking about, but we needs to be more sensitized and aware. Sometimes we are not even aware of it. Every relationship, every family relationship, conjugal relations are frequently being ossified by a sort of standardizations, the standardization of behavior, whether it is family space, whether it is office space, even the familiar social space. Social media, digital life has literally reprogrammed us in such a fashion, that it has become a narcotic weed, without sniffing which we are unable to breathe. Now, it is in this context that, before I move over to an ecosophical approach which we can detect in ancient Sanskrit literature, please consider the number of activities today that we pursue through social media and digital platforms. We do virtually everything. We are encouraged to do that. We even hang out on social media. And the concept of hanging out today has literally morphed into the digital medium. We don't know what we are doing. Do we really hang out anymore with friends? Guattari calls this, the new social ecology of the era of technological evolution of the media. And its goals are seemingly non-capitalist. Okay, seemingly non-capitalist, because it is affordable. Technological evolution has made life easy. Ease of living. We are very accustomed to this phrase, ease of living today. The ease of living index. Yesterday there was, I think, something was published by a certain agency, classifying ease of living in the cities of India. Which city has more ease of living? What are the parameters? What that index means? Whether it all makes any sense or not, like, Bangalore tops the list as a city which has ease of living. Now, but we know what is happening to Bangalore, what is happening to, the reality of water scarcity in Bangalore. We know what is happening to the lakes of Bangalore, how water will have to be transported via tanks from the river, which is almost 80 kilometers away from the main city. We know the traffic jams of Bangalore, how Bangalore is literally a trafficker's nightmare, literally. So, but it is still tops, the city tops the ease of living index. So, Guattari calls this the new social ecology of this era of technological evolution. So the goals are seemingly non-capitalist because life has been made easy thanks to our mobile phone companies. So it has brought about a sense of a miniaturization of the social space. So this is the new social ecology which Guattari observes have transformed our lives. Now, as serving and prospective teachers of literature today in our classrooms, what do? We who have been dealing with young minds ought to have realized by now that literature ought to be taught and introduced to young minds in the light of this new ecosophy. It's high time we realize it if we haven't yet. Hence, my choice of Abhigyan Shakuntalam as a work which may be taken up right at the outset of a bachelor's degree program in the Indian classroom for students pursuing literature in any language. For its major theme, the major theme of Abhigyan Shakuntala is Abhigyan, or remembrance of something which we once possessed but have lost. Talk to the young generation today, almost all of them seem to be lost. Their positions, their confidence levels are all increasingly becoming manipulated by a collective mass media subjectivity. Okay, young people are constructing their subjectivities on the basis of certain imagistic constructions of the mass media. The Instagram or the Facebook profile, generating split selves, distancing themselves from the oikos, the true oikos. Now, first, let us understand how a work such as Abhigyan Shakuntala may open up new ecosophical vistas to modify and reinvent the ways in which we may start living once more. I repeat, living. Now, if we, go back to the story world of Abhigyan Shakuntala, the play may be interpreted as a sort of a journey from cognition through amnesia to recognition or Abhigyan. Whose recognition? Whose Abhigyan? Apparently Dushanta's Abhigyan. In the first stages, the cognition may be accosted by rapture, seduction, and a narcotic fascination, for the beauty of fascination towards the beauty of the physical beauty of Shakuntala. This is exactly what happens to Dushanta when he spots Shakuntala for the first time. Now, the philosophical understanding of aesthetic delight or rasavad, of the rati bhava or the emotion of love or the erotic, involves nothing but the spectator's own blissful relishing or savoring of what? We may ask, what? Savoring of what? The answer may be constructed in this manner, that the savoring of not just the emotion of love on a material level, but a savoring of the Brahman, the Brahma Swad, savoring of the Brahma on the affective level. That's exactly how ancient Indian aesthetics conceptualize the notion of emotion or bhava. And at the affective level, the audience relishes it through the agency of Dushanta, the protagonist. And Dushanta's entry into the vegetal paradise of Kanva Muni's hermitage, ashram, over which Shakuntala presides like a virtual goddess. Shakuntala happens to be a sort of an embodiment of Sri Lakshmi. And, she's described as Sadhi Daivata Iva Shakuntalayanu Malinitiram Ashramo, as if she's the deity of the ashram. She's the deity. She presides, over life like a virtual goddess. And the audience is allowed entry into the charming, erotically tinged picture of summer or spring. And Dushanta, in the first scene, almost lurks in the shade of the trees, watching when Dushanta comes inside, when he gains entry into Kanva Muni's ashram. He's watching the proceedings from behind the bushes when he suddenly finds Shakuntala emerging along with her with her sakhis. Dushanta lurks in the shade of the trees, watching and listening as Shakuntala, who is the Shri of the poetic universe, makes her entry attended by two lovely companions. And Dushanta, the ravisher in waiting, his first cognitive level is, erotic in nature. I mean, he's responding from the level of, instincts. So the king's initial entry on the stage in his chariot, if you remember the first scene, the scene with which the play begins, his initial entry onto the stage in his chariot, aggressively pursuing a sort of a hermitage deer, that too can be perceived as a sort of an assault, a sort of a symbolizing a sort of an assault on the peace and innocence of the primordial paradise of Kanva Muni's ashram. But the hermitage's paradisal allure entrances the king at a later stage, and then later on, when Dushanta sees Shakuntala, Dushyanta plays the ravisher as he decides to wrest Shakuntala from the hermitage into the world of carnal and material ownership. He expresses his desire to marry her. And look at the way in which he responds here, and how he is eagerly gazing at a bee which was hovering around Shakuntala's body. And I have a translation here. I've quoted from a translation by Arthur W. Ryder, where the king is jealous of the bee, and referring to the bee, the king. This is a soliloquy. The king says, "Eager bee, you lightly skim over the eyelids, trembling rim toward the cheek, a quiver, gently buzzing around her cheek." This is the 1912 translation. "Whispering in her ear, you seek secrets to deliver, while her hands that way and this strike at you. You steal a kiss, love's all a honey maker. I know nothing but her name, not her caste, nor whence she came. You, my rival, take her." So it's a sort of an affective encounter, engagement with the bee. And in the process, the story may be read as a sort of an allegory of sorts, an allegory of man's uncontrolled authority of the ecosystem under the spell of the lust for lucre, material possession. Now, in the process, as the play proceeds, we find that the play traces a sort of a journey from the cognition of Shakuntala, Dushyanta's cognition of Shakuntala on the material level, on the corporeal level, to a sort of a decognition. First, a decognition. Cognition suffers a jolt. A decognition takes place in the middle of the play, accompanied by a long-lasting amnesia, leading to degeneration and decay of the Sri principle. Now, here, this too can be read as a sort of an allegory. And the modern man, in fact, may be read as the new Dushyanta, traversing through a wasteland of sorts, blighted by his own inadequacy and amnesia, in search of the Sri principle, as man goes through successive stages of degeneration till the ultimate abandonment of Shakuntala happens. And the recognition of Shakuntala, the abhigyan, happens after that. So it's first a cognition of Shakuntala on one level, and then a process of decognition follows, after which the recognition process is initiated. The recognition process of abhigyan is painfully accompanied by gloom, despair, frustration, and the helplessness accompanied by Dushyanta's desperate search for reconnection. Now, this is Dushyanta's profound estrangement or alienation. We may contrast Dushyanta's first level of response to Shakuntala and his final recognition of her at the end of the play. So the first response of Dushyanta being compared with the ultimate response of Dushyanta towards Shakuntala. In the first response, you will find traces of carnality, where he responds to the body, the appeal, the corporeal appeal of Shakuntala. He points out to her lower lip, the way she appears as an unsmelt flower, a shoot, the nails have not snipped a jewel unworn, wine yet unsavored. Look at the images which Ryder has translated here from the original Sanskrit, and I really feel pained at the fact that I do not know Sanskrit. Had I known, then I would have I could have quoted these lines in the original. So here, this is an allegory of a man lusting to ravish the untamed, the untainted, and unexplored. Now, later on, the final response of Dushyanta, at the recognition of Dushyanta at a final level, Please observe the his change of parole here. When the king, looking at Shakuntala with plaintive joy, the king remarks, "It is she, it is Shakuntala." Finally, the recognition, the pale, worn face, the careless dress, the single braid, show her still true, me pitiless, the long vow paid. Now, this is the reinstatement of the primal Sri principle, shown of her grandeur, yet retaining the promise of fruition, the poignant promise of fulfillment. Now, the journey is complete here. Now, it is here that we may adopt an ecosophical approach. It is here that we may adopt an ecosophical approach to the play at that stage of human civilization when we stand at the brink of abject abandonment. Okay, we stand at the brink of abject abandonment. We have been abandoned. We have been abandoned by whom? By the Sri principle of our oikos. We are today homeless, shelterless, staring at a bleak, stark, pale stretch of a vast, blighted expanse. Now, this is all that I had to say about, say, an ancient Indian work. Now, what about the global vision of contemporary Indian literature? I thought of using a few contemporary literary works where poets have, or I was desperately, frantically, in fact, trying to search for authors who have attempted to address the ecosophical approach to to representation, because literature is all about representation. And I found to my joy, Hoshang Merchant. Hoshang Merchant, as we all know, an Indian poet deeply rooted in his family traditions, and in Hoshang Merchant's poetry, this is my reading of his poetry. When we read his poetry, there is a tendency again to be sucked up into subject-oriented assessment. But however, Hoshang Merchant represents the global vision of an Indian poet relating to the grand disconnect which I spoke about. I've been speaking about over the last half an hour or so. How the oikos of global politics, has sort of changed. And in this connection, I have identified a couple of poems by Hoshang Merchant from Hoshang Merchant's collection Sufiana Poems. The first being Reading Arabic Poetry the Day Iraq Fell. I don't know whether if anybody's, I'm sure many of you may have read this poem. Excerpts from Reading Arabic Poetry the Day Iraq Fell. You see the lines, they are extremely sensitive to this new cause of ecosophy, if you may put it that way. A new Mongol has come, and we have to stoke our tandoors with our children's bones. Why does the Mongol only understand blood, oil and blood, blood and oil? The seabeds of Bahrain are polluted by oil. There are no pearls of the purest water now. The purest water now is tears. Mosque minarets now are factory chimneys, and I smell burning human flesh. Water is pure cyanide, and people prefer to drink salt water, refine it, and drink it like our own tears. I'm compelled to read this for you. This is how Hoshang Merchant represents the oikos of global politics with its gluttonous eyes riveted at oil, trade, and land. Homelands have been lost. Men and women have been exiled amidst this chaos. Yet the world rolls on from one Holocaust to another. And at the beginning of this session, we spoke of ecosophy. Hoshang Merchant's poem situates Indian poetry at the global crossroads of India's changed social ecology. As Guattari recommends, way back in the late, in the 90s, that ecology must stop being associated with the image of a small nature-loving minority or with qualified specialists. Ecology, in my sense, questions the whole of subjectivity and capitalist power formations, whose sweeping progress cannot be guaranteed to continue as it has been for the past decade. And Guattari does not propose a new model of society of sorts, bereft of mass media subjectivities, because we cannot do away with mass media today. That is an inevitable one-way journey. But he recommends what he calls he recommends what he calls new systems and poles of valorization. He says, I'm not proposing a ready-made model of society here, but simply the acceptance of a complete range of ecosophical components so as to institute, in particular, new systems of valorization. Now, what does he mean by new systems of valorization? One, as is evident from this slide, down with the cliches of humanism and enlightenment. Humanitas, as the Renaissance humanists understood, has to be removed from the center of the cosmic consciousness. It is here that Guattari proposes a new ecosophical ethics. Right since the Renaissance and Enlightenment, the man-nature binary had posited man at the center of the cosmos and valorized him, valorized man as the architect of his own destiny, the arbiter of destinies, the arbiter of not just human destinies, but the arbiter of animal and the mineral world. The animal and the mineral world have been under man's surveillance, for such a long time. It still is. Now it is time to switch the subject positions to propose new poles of valorization. And in this context, once again, I would refer to another poem by Hoshang Merchant, Tsunami Sutra, from the Sufiana poems. So, a new ecosophical ethics ought to be formulated to establish new connections with the organicist notions of life and habitats. And this is a poem on organic marine life with a premonition of a catastrophe. And again, if I read out these lines to you, if you will observe what I just now said. Why is the sea ebbing so far into itself to crash better onto the land? Animals have inner hearing. Please note this. Animals have inner hearing, birds inner sight, even reptiles sense all with their skin. Then why does the human mind set store by things, not sense the sea of pain receding and churning onto the shores of this world and the next? A butterfly's wings in Chile set up a typhoon in China. I was Shuangzu. I slept and dreamt. I was a worm. Please observe, there is an evident sort of a sense of becoming. I slept and dreamt I was a worm. I woke up to become not poet, not worm, but butterfly who set up a typhoon in China. It's a beautiful poem, a poem valorizing marine life, equipped with, marine life being equipped with better sensory perceptions. Observe the focus of, the haptic sensory perceptions. How animals sometimes feel a sort of an impending catastrophe on their own skin. Please note the haptic references, hapticity in the poem. So a butterfly's wings in Chile set up a typhoon in China. I was Zhuangzi. I slept and dreamt I was a worm. I woke up to become not poet, not worm, but butterfly who set up a typhoon in China. So, animals are equipped with better sensory perceptions to intercept future holocausts, whereas man, with all his tools at his aid, hapless and helpless at processing sensory data in predicting a marine catastrophe. So A butterfly's wings in Chile, wings of the butterfly are more powerful than all the human machines to predict a typhoon in China. The poet, in his dream, aspires to become a butterfly. So, Hoshang Merchant, in that poem which I read out, proposes a new ecosophical ethics by anticipating new poles of valorization, which Guattari speaks about, as it were, to posit animal life in the center of the scheme of things. So this is Hoshang Merchant's creative engagement with new subjectivities and subject positions, long lost and to be rekindled once again. Now, this is what Guattari proposes in his Three Ecologies. A new ecosophy must be set up. Now, in the concluding part of my lecture, I will sum up what is meant by how one may use ecosophy as a methodology, and how ecosophy may be connected with the process of intercepting affects. Way back in the ancient past, our Indian aesthetic methodology oriented ourselves towards the understanding of affects, the understanding of our cognitive responses to art through our affects, through our emotional responses. So Indian aesthetics stands on the pedestal of affects. Today, we perhaps require a new sort of an affect-based methodology. So ecosophy is the new schizotherapy, as Gregory, both Gregory Bateson, Guattari, and others, they propose. Ecosophy is the new schizotherapy that can decenter the singular, dominant, and brutal psyche of capitalism, which is currently considered the only mind of the earth. Now, as students and teachers of literature, how can we ecosophize our methods of study? A, to read literary works and expose and detach them from the inescapable matrix of capitalism. Art has its own precarious relationship with capitalism, no doubt. And it has a tendency to be appropriated within the focus of reification, as we all know. But one must remember, that I'm quoting from Malcolm Miles, who in his book Eco-Aesthetics, Art, Literatures and Architecture in a Period of Climate Change. I have referred to this book in my reading list. Malcolm Miles says that art cannot save our planet, that's for sure. It can represent, critique, and play imaginatively on the problem and picture the futures, not prescribed by money. Art itself is produced in this context and always reflects the conditions of its production, just as it usually goes beyond them. Now, as students of literature, here is something of an ecosophical approach to literature, which I pointed out in this slide, highlighted in this slide. New ways of thinking, new ways of proposing interconnectedness of things. Literature can be read as a container of affects, of affective encounters through which reciprocity is activated. Literatures, we mustn't forget that literature ultimately deals with the body or bodies. Literatures ultimately deal with bodies. And we know nothing about a body until we know what affects are, how they engage with other affects of another body, etc. This is what Felix Guattari calls ecosophy in praxis. And it encompasses what he calls the three ecologies. A, the material biophysical ecology, that is one way of looking at ecology. The social or cultural ecology, the second level of ecology. The third level of ecology is the most important level, perceptual level of ecology. Human subjectivity articulated through images, sounds, and hapticity. So how to engage literary understanding through these three ecologies, particularly the third ecology, the perceptual ecology, via our affects. So this can become a sort of a new approach to the study of literature. And in this context, one must remember that care, the idea of care, happens to be the key to ecosophy. The idea of care. I have quoted from Colin Garner and Patricia McCormack, who in their book Ecosophical Aesthetics refers to this idea of care. Now, we are so used to this word care that sometimes we forget that, well, the same sort of innate tendency in our human selves, in our bodies, in our response to both our bodies as well as our bodies. Care would be a kind of a acting out through transference, exploiting endless complexes of sensations, desires, affects, and ideas. And a sort of an intersubjectivity can be constructed. And, the job of the reader, as a reader, the reader's job as a student of literature, as a teacher of literature, maybe to reconceive expressivity as a sort of a dynamic, transformative movement, so that thinking, acting, and caring can function as a whole. Now, I have suddenly, while I was preparing this, my slides, I remembered this line from Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Perhaps, we must go back to that poem also. We remember, that epiphanic moment at the end of the poem when the mariner finally sheds off, his guilt, sheds off his weight. And when does that moment happen? When he is able to empathize with, those water snakes. Those water snakes no more, register to his consciousness as, repulsive or abominable. Somewhere down the line, there's a sort of a becoming of sorts, as Hoshang Merchant would have conceived of, where the mariner identifies himself with these marine creatures who seem to be so happy in their own world. And at that moment of, contact, sort of a spiritual contact of sorts, the self same moment I could pray, and from my neck so free the albatross fell off and sank like lead into the sea. So our albatross also needs to be shed. With these words, I come to the end of my lecture, and there's a short reading list which I have provided here. If it's possible, then I will send you my slides. If students need these references, they can be circulated later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. It was an exhaustive presentation. We thoroughly enjoyed the presentation, and I'm sure the audience liked your perspective into literature and ecology. I can't see questions yet on my screen, so I think if anyone has any questions or queries, they can drop the questions in the chat box. And I would like to request my senior teachers here to respond to the lecture first.
I must congratulate Professor Dr. Parthasarathi Gupta. That was an eye-opener, because I personally had no idea of what you would be speaking of as an ecosophical approach. I think I told you even that. So I have no specific questions, But yes, I entirely agree with you, and no observations also as such, except that I must congratulate you. Thank you. Professor Mahapatra would respond. Yeah.
Dr. Gupta, I really didn't have, I mean, I must say I missed your earlier lecture. I, I was deprived of the pleasure of listening to you. You are a wonderful speaker and a very interesting topic which you discussed here. I like this whole idea of a good oikos versus bad oikos. Ecology of good ideas versus bad ideas. Yeah. And I have a few observations to make though.
Yes,
Uh,
sir.
yeah. The observations are when we talk about the oikos, we believe it as a very primordial, as you say, a system which is pre-given, which actually is kind of a priori, system of ethics, well, which involves ethics of, it's kind of one would say, ethical system of self-consciousness of something that is pre-given and which exists a priori, which is free from disease, gangrene of mass media, and contagion and toxicity, which you were talking about. These are very interesting, well, disease metaphors that, Guatri and a few others you mentioned have been using. My problem is, what is the metaphysics of oikos? Because when we talk about oikos being already there, don't we presuppose that there are human beings already there to define oikos in a certain way? I mean, can it have a metaphysics of something that is beyond human ethical cognition as good? Because it's a fundamental philosophical question I'm talking about. And again, what is the nature of the rhetoric of anthropology? I'm sorry, ecology. What is the metaphysics of oikos and what is the rhetoric of ecology? Before I invite your response, my feeling is that, okay, anthropocentrism is bad, but can we do away with anthropogenesis? Because all these are anthropogenetic. Nature becomes valorized as the unpolluted, uncontaminated, pure, which is prior to humans, but nature in itself is an ontic category. Nature becomes nature because of its recognition as an ethical system, once again through human consciousness. So to what extent can we think of that pure ontology that is unmediated by any human consciousness, good or bad? That's the question.
Yes, Professor Mahapatra. May I respond now?
Yes, please.
Professor Mahapatra, first of all, it's extremely encouraging to to find that you are responding to my my talk here. I still consider myself a student. I'm too junior to you, sir, and this is. I mean, I feel I'm privileged that I'm having to respond to you. Yeah. Now, yes, sir. what I completely share your concern here. I too was desperately and rather helplessly trying to fathom the the metaphysics of oikos. What exactly do we how do we exactly chart the course of and find new centers of valorization, as I spoke about in my last two slides, and whether we can actually do away with anthropogenesis. We There is a sense of helplessness. There's a sense of helplessness in the academia. There's a sense of helplessness in in the beginner, because critical theory has literally bombarded us with sort of perspectives. With we are living right now in a matrix, which is almost sort of clogged our sensibilities in a way. I'm talking about academia, and ultimately, when we face this question, it is sort of an existential question. What is the metaphysics of the oikos? Uh, and what should be the nature of the rhetoric of ecology? Uh, I First of all, I would like to empathetically sort of relate to your, it's a sort of a groping in the dark. It's a sort of a groping in the dark. And my study has shown that if at all we apply this in praxis, all our, attempts at practically, using this non-anthropocentric methods of approaching, say, culture, aesthetics, literature, that too somehow comes to be colored at some point of time by our anthropocentric tendency to generalize. And on the level of, say, on the level of actual lived experience, if as a sort of a inhabitor, as an inhabitant of this planet, as an inhabitant of society, as an inhabitant of what Guattari calls the three ecologies: material, social, perceptual. As an inhabitant of this planet, as an inhabitant of this world, if I want to propose a sort of an alternative sort of a habitus, an alternative sort of a oikos, how do I construct that alternative oikos? We end up ultimately simulating an oikos. We end up being drawn towards simulations. That's all that we can do, because we are living in such a world today, which is a world infested with rapid urbanization and real estate everywhere. How do we situate ourselves? How do we bring about a sort of a how do we release what Hushang Merchant would have proposed, our hapticity? How do we encourage our perceptive ability to find connections with animals, with other creatures on this planet? And how do we sort of propose an alternative sort of a ecology? How do we construct an alternative ecology? We helplessly cannot. I'm talking about the way we live today, the way we inhabit our oikos. We end up creating simulations. We end up creating simulations of the green world around us, because we cannot go back to a sort of a primal stage, as you just now stated right now. We cannot go back to, it's like going back to the Lacanian real. Just as we are acutely aware of the impossibility of going back to the real, so there is an acute awareness too of an impossibility of going back to, to reconstruct our oikos. But as I would like to look at it, as students of literature, a bit of consciousness on our part, if we just change our vantage point, if we simply provide a sort of an alternative vantage point to the reading of works, to responding to art, and valorize them in our academic institutions, what we can do at the most is on the level of being an academic, proposing, say, a sort of an alternative sort of a syllabus structure, at least to some extent encouraging a sort of a study pattern, a study of literature, a study of aesthetics from a changed perspective. That is the most that we can do as teachers of literature, as scholars of literature, as students of literature, because as a sort of a inhabitant of this oikos, I see no way by which we can actually reconstruct our oikos. And so the idea of finding out the metaphysics of that oikos simply becomes a sort of a groping in the dark for me. I don't know whether I was able to approach it.
I do understand it's a very difficult but a very seminal question, and all people, all philosophers, what their name, have been actually exploring how it's possible to go back to that state. Yeah. Again, no, my point is actually when we are developing a discourse, we have to be critically aware of the limitations and also
Yes, absolutely.
the foundations. For instance, when you talk about art, let's talk about a certain aesthetics which should not be mediated by capitalism, but is it really possible? Can we think of an aesthetics as a praxis without a certain cultural economy? That's number one. And number two, how about care? Care, is it really non-utilitarian and absolutely disinterested? Because if we look at the history of human civilization, care, either of plants or animals, which began as the earliest modern mode of livelihood with which civilization began, was always to be utilitarian. So can these again be possible? These are questions, well, for us not to, these can't have ready-made answers, but then these are questions we ought to keep in mind while developing, this kind of a discourse. Would you agree with me there?
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely, sir. Because limitations, we have to be. In fact, perhaps this was one of the flaws in my talk, where I did not focus on limitations. Limitations, every critical stance, and particularly when we are dealing with an ecosophical approach, at every alley, we encounter limitations of a kind. And and whenever we have approached this, coming back to your reference to care, sir, if we begin to introspect on the idea of care from the ecosophical perspective, yes, ultimately it all boils down to formulating a new sort of, or rather new territories. We start being drawn into new territories. Guattari talks about going beyond territories, beyond hierarchies, but we tend to be drawn towards sort of defining territories once again. Like, say, for example, today in the cross-disciplinarian sense, geriatry happens to be a very important discipline which has begun to affect our studies of literature. Okay, and when we talk about disability studies, when we theorize upon the idea of disability, when we start theorizing upon various aspects of geriatry, because geriatry as a discipline, in fact, did not exist at one point of time, and even in the medical parlance. So, but whenever we try to develop an alternative methodology of sorts, we tend to be drawn into territories. Well, without territories, perhaps we cannot live, and which is a reality, and which is part of the Deleuze and Guattari project. We will always be drawn towards territories. There is, in fact, the project is not to defy territories. There will always be flights, but ultimately we have to come back to our territories and try to redefine our lives from the perspective of territories. So perhaps in academia, our new concerns for geriatry and disability perhaps is giving us a new insight into care studies, if you look at it that way.
Can I ask something,
Yes,
Professor
sir.
Das? Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, please go ahead.
Professor Das, I am Prakash, and I teach English at Hari Singh Gaur University in Sagar, Madhya Pradesh. And of course, it was a wonderful experience listening to you. This your ecosophical insights into this ancient Indian classical text, and also references to Hushang Merchant. And I enjoyed indeed your interaction, beautiful interaction with Professor Mohapatra. Now, see, and I don't know, my it's not a question exactly. It's all fuzzy, whatever I'm going to say. We've been doing theory. You also made references to Guattari and Iota, and we have been doing theory for the past 20, 25, 30 years. And this is my personal thesis. Perhaps many wouldn't agree with that. That one of the problems that we in the Orient or non-Western world face in a way, or are experiencing in a way, is that we have constantly been defining ourselves, trying to understand ourselves, our political systems, social systems, ethical systems, and what not, in the light of all those theories that were developed in the West, Euro American systems, elite Euro American systems. Now, ecosophy also, becomes a kind of a theoretical branch that way, doesn't it? Now, but when you were doing this ecosophical reading or a brief explanation of Abhijnana Shakuntalam, and that was interesting. And I was wondering if there could be an interesting truck connection between rasa theory, you are a man of Indian aesthetics also, and ecosophy. But what I was actually thinking was whether is it possible or should it not be done that we develop our own ecosophy, like our own ancient philosophical systems are so different from, differently oriented compared to the Western philosophical systems. Can we have our own indigenous or local meta ecosophies? If I make a reference to Yoda meta narrative, so why not our own ecosophy? Does it make sense, sir? Whatever fuzzy things I've said. That's all I have to say.
Yes, sir. You're absolutely right, sir. I completely agree with you. I have a point to make here, sir, which is in support of your argument. When we study Indian aesthetics in the classroom, sometimes we, helplessly sort of and also comically realize that like say, for example, when I teach theater, when I teach say contemporary theater, modern theater, uh, and I discuss theories of theater, theories of performance. Uh, when we look at, you know, say, the theater of the roots tradition, the Indian theater of roots tradition, somewhere down the line, we realize that even the theater of the roots tradition, perhaps somehow it coincides with, or rather, parallelly, takes place along with, say, or rather, maybe is influenced by the West to some extent. Instead of, we ought to have been much more respondent to, much more, responsive to our roots, but somewhere down the line, as if it is the West which is introducing ourselves to, our roots through, say, practitioners such as Stanislavski, and then later on Jerzy Grotowski. And if we read, say, Stanislavski's An Actor Prepares, or say Grotowski's Towards a Poor Theater, there are, uncanny sort of, references, uncanny echoes of Abhinava Gupta. Uncanny echoes of Abhinava Gupta's, Abhasvad. There are uncanny echoes of Abhinava Gupta's, theory of Pratyabhigyan. And because, I found in certain chapters of, your An Actor Prepares by Stanislavski, he talks about, the craft of the actor. And the way he talks about the craft of the actor reminds us of what Abhinava Gupta spoke about long back in his in his commentary on the Natya Shastra. So maybe this has been our fate, and we perhaps have not been able to somehow overcome this particular, say, tendency to get back to ourselves through the West. So we have initiated a return to our roots through the West. It's like, when Girish Karnad writes Hayavadana, he writes Hayavadana not basing his story on the Kathasarit Sagar. He traces the route of via Thomas Mann's The Transposed Heads.
Yes,
so that is how somewhere down the line, there's an irony in the way we respond to our roots. Yes. I don't know whether I was able to share your.
Thank you very much, sir. Everything proliferates, and if it proliferates, it's a good answer. Yes. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. There is a question from one of our students, and I'd like to read it the way it is. And she writes, "Sir, the ecological crisis from an ecosophical perspective is basically a reflection of the crisis of man's relationship within himself and with others. That's the natural world. That is the climate crisis and degradation outside is a reflection of crisis within. We are the self-proclaimed protectors of the ecology, but we failed badly in that as well. What are your views on the same? Are we the villains? That's the question."
Look, thank you for the question. Thank you for the question. But I think we should not indulge in blame games here. It's very important for us not to fall into the trap of, blaming each other, because as Professor Mahapatra also, pointed out quite rightly, that it is not possible for us to, go beyond the territories of, say, digital capitalism. It is not possible for us to go beyond the territories which we have carved out for ourselves, under the impact of global capitalism. It is not possible. So instead of trying to, vilify ourselves, it is important to, start charity from our own homes and, do something at our own levels, in the level of the classroom, in the level of, at the level of our classrooms, at the level of our homes, at the level of our own responses to, social ecology. I don't know to what extent that may be possible for us. Perhaps we shall fail, but then the failure too shall leave imprints in the sands of on the sands of time. That's my way of looking at it.
Thank you, sir. I don't see any more questions on the screen, but if anyone in the audience would like to respond or has a question, can very well raise that. I would like to request Professor Himadri Lahiri, if he is still there with us. Professor Lahiri, yes.
Thank you, Ajit. I don't have much to say. I enjoyed the session thoroughly, especially the question answer session, the responses. While I was actually listening to the lecture and to the discussion, I had 2 points in mind. Number one, etymologically speaking, oikos also refers to the household.
House,
And yes, household. And the word and the household, spatially speaking, is also about spatial arrangement, relationship between spaces, which I think is very important. And while we are thinking about the world, the globe as the oikos, we should also think about our own homes and our own societies as a kind of ecology, a system of ecology. This was what I was thinking of, and this means that we have immediate relationship with our immediate environment, okay?
Yes.
And we can think small as well, okay? And I thoroughly enjoyed the question, Professor Mahapatra's questions about basic question about the metaphysics of oikos and whether we can really forsake the kind of situation we find ourselves in, the overtly capitalistic kind of situations in which we find ourselves in. So, of course not. Okay, and therefore, what can we do from our own point of view? That is a kind of situation we should try to respond to. Right now, therefore, you see that perhaps, as you all discussed, that there is an element of inevitability that we are heading towards. Okay, but then we should be aware about what we can do. Greta Thunberg, for herself, is doing her own duty. And the state actors sometimes respond to similar situations, sometimes they don't. Okay? So, but then what is also important that we need to do our own duties from our own small areas. And in this respect, I was thinking of the second point, which is that we have our responsibilities in the classroom, which raise the question of the classroom situations. And there, I feel that raising question is one of the important things that we can do, because many of us may not be fully aware of what we need to do from ecosophical points of view and what we should not do. So that is an important question about which questions may be raised. And secondly, about the reading strategies, I feel that the philosophy of affect is a very important theory, as you mentioned, because that also involves emotion, and more than that, circulation of emotion. If we go deep into the theoretical premises of the affect theory, we feel that there is a society of individuals among whom the emotions are circulated. There are agencies which help spreading the emotions or constraining the emotion, but the emotion is nevertheless very important. And the two things, the awareness and the emotion, when they are combined together, and in our reading strategies, in our teaching strategies, if we can implement that, that would be wonderful to my mind. But again, this is a very limited space where we can work from. But then I have these two observations to make, and I thoroughly enjoyed your lecture and the questions that were raised. Another point that we are all products of in Indian academia, especially those of us who are associated with the Department of English and Culture Studies, we are basically products of the British system. And what happens is that, therefore, it has its own, ways and means to which we are influenced. So probably it is very hard for us to come out of this. This cannot be done only through saying about making the important statement that we need to do that. But what is also necessary is to overcome the amnesia about our own epistemology, and that can be brought into the present situation. And I think beginning has been made. And what is necessary is that not all subjects may require an oriental epistemology. And since we live in a globalized world, epistemological system, a system of knowledge, there might be some kind of dialogue between the Eastern epistemology and the Western epistemology. And we need not impose deliberate kinds of injunctions on the reading of certain texts or certain areas, but then no epistemology can be derided or privileged. We can have a holistic kind of an approach that might really help. This is my opinion. And obviously, there might be points of differences, but this is what I personally feel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Himanshu. I was just noting down your points like your student. I am. Always do that whenever you speak. I was noting down each and every comment, each and every suggestion by all of the distinguished, professors here, and I myself am extremely illuminated, and I deem myself fortunate, to be.
Partha, I was wondering if I could say in supplement to what has already been said. No,
Yes.
I have always been intrigued by the prevalence of terms and terminologies that have actually come into, let's say, global finance discourse and management discourse from ecology. I'll give you very small examples. When we talk about the culture of startups,
Yes.
there you find many terms like, eco-habitat, ecology, symbiosis, period of, what is that they call it, incubation.
Yes.
Very, very interestingly, all these terms somehow have, I would say, prevailed upon the contemporary discourse of global finances and technological productions, which are being carried out at the expense of our green belts. All these involve overmining. So on the one hand, you are, actually hunting with the lions. You are also at the same time, running with running with the ship. Now, actually, you know what, Partha, I'll tell you something very interesting about my experience. I was given a few classes at Sambalpur IIM, and I talked to them about the politics of this kind of a discourse where we have a prevalence of eco this and eco that, okay, and eco habitat and all that. You know, I wanted to make the point that by using these, actually, we are trying to invoke a certain system which actually is pre-given, it is out there, undistorted, in its pristine and primordial form, which we have destroyed perhaps. But when we use those very same terms to justify or to elaborate upon or to develop an extremely utilitarian and manipulative discourse using the same terms, actually we are indulging it in a kind of vicious politics. Actually, my question of analyzing the rhetoric is it was also partly colored by my own observations. Since you have been working on this, please do take it up. For heaven's sake, I mean, why is it that we have prevalence of everything? Even engineers talk about the ecology of technology. Technology is anti-ecology. We know that. That's the whole thing.
Yes, thank you, sir. I mean, that was extremely well thought of. And I also was given a few classes for our management department. And when I was, when I was teaching my management students English communication classes, motivational sessions, etc., it instantly occurred to me that I was reading Nicholas Taleb's Black Swan. The concept of the black swan is again, which was which suddenly was, it loomed large in the horizon. I think around 5-6 years ago, or if I'm not mistaken. That book suddenly became very popular, Black Swan. And today, ironically rather, we suddenly have a black swan in 2020 in the form of, the COVID-19. And how, this COVID-19 situation completely changed the way in which, the globe began to revisit, ideas about business, management, professionalism. Everything changed because of this virus. And so, Nicholas Taleb's Black Swan, in fact, the idea of the Black Swan, the concept of the Black Swan itself is, as Professor Mahapatra rightly points out, something which is, literally lifted out of, nature, lifted out of that something that pre-given primordial, nature. And that is aiding the management theorist to, conceive of certain situations which might change the way the world looks at business. Thank you so much, sir. That was a very, very illuminating point.
Thank you, sir. And we have come to the end of the session. It's my responsibility to propose a formal vote of thanks. And I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Parthasarathi Gupta in a special way for agreeing to deliver a talk on this topic. And as I said at the end of the lecture, that we actually enjoyed the session, all of us. And the interactive session that followed actually proves that how engaging the session was. Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. And I must thank Professor Lahiri, Dr. Prakash Joshi, and Professor Ashok Kumar Mahapatra for their inputs. And a big thanks to all the participants for being there, for listening to us and encouraging us. Thank you all. And that's the end of the lecture today. The next speaker in the series will be Professor Ashok Kumar Mahapatra, and we have an interesting session coming up. Yes. So we'll send out the flyers for that lecture, perhaps towards the end of this month. So we hope all of us will be meeting once again for that particular wonderful session that we are going to have. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.